In 1986, the world's largest manufacturer of single-engine aircraft simply stopped building them. Cessna, the company that had defined American aviation for 6 decades, shuttered its piston production lines and walked away. No warning, no timeline for return. The factory fell silent. But here's what made this so extraordinary. There was nothing wrong with the planes. The Cessna 172 had become the most popular aircraft ever built, beloved by pilots, trusted by flight schools, proven across millions of flight hours. Yet Cessna's CEO, Russell Meyer, declared he couldn't afford to make another one. The culprit wasn't engineering failure or market collapse. It was something far more insidious. A legal revolution that had been quietly building for 2 decades finally reached critical mass, and it was strangling general aviation to death. By 1994, American aircraft production had plummeted 95% from its peak. Piper had declared bankruptcy. Beech had abandoned most of its product line. An industry that once employed over 100,000 workers was hemorrhaging jobs by the tens of thousands. The lawyers, it seemed, had won. General aviation was dying. But then something unprecedented happened, and everything changed. It started with a power tool in California. In 1963, the state Supreme Court issued a ruling that would reshape American manufacturing forever. Greenman versus Uber Power Products established a revolutionary legal doctrine called strict liability. The principle was simple but devastating. Manufacturers could now be held responsible for defective products regardless of whether they had been negligent. No proof of wrongdoing required. Courts across the nation quickly adopted this standard throughout the 1960s and 1970s. For most industries, it meant higher insurance costs and more careful quality control. For general aviation, it meant something far worse. It meant potential extinction. Here's what made aircraft manufacturers so uniquely vulnerable. A car might last 15 years. A refrigerator perhaps 20, but general aviation aircraft remain in service for decades. The average age of America's single-engine fleet exceeded 28 years. Every plane ever built became a permanent legal liability stretching into infinity. Specialized attorneys recognized an extraordinary opportunity. They began targeting aircraft manufacturers with relentless precision, turning product liability lawsuits into a lucrative specialty. The National Transportation Safety Board investigated crash after crash and found the same conclusion. The overwhelming majority resulted from pilot error. Yet manufacturers remained liable for designs certified safe decades earlier. The accidents weren't their fault. The lawsuits came anyway. The financial devastation was staggering. Liability insurance costs exploded from $50 per aircraft in 1962 to $100,000 per aircraft by 1988. That's a 2,000-fold increase in just 24 years. Industry-wide premiums surged from $24 million in 1978 to $210 million by 1985, nearly 9-fold in 7 years. Consider what Beech Aircraft alone endured. Between 1983 and 1986, the company defended 203 separate lawsuits. Each case cost an average of $530,000 to fight. Win or lose, the legal fees kept mounting. Russell Meyer, Cessna's chairman, carried a particular lawsuit in his pocket wherever he went. It became his symbol of an industry under siege. A man had purchased a 49-year-old Cessna 150, crashed it, and Cessna still faced legal liability. Half a century of safe operation meant nothing. Think about this for a moment. How could you possibly justify building new aircraft when every single plane you've ever manufactured becomes a permanent target for litigation? The manufacturers didn't just face rising costs, they faced complete extinction. And one by one, America's aviation giants began to fall. In 1983, Cessna Aircraft Company posted its first annual loss in the company's entire history. For 6 decades, the world's largest general aviation manufacturer had operated profitably through wars, recessions, and oil crises. Now the lawyers had accomplished what global catastrophes could not. The dominoes began falling with terrifying speed. In 1986, Cessna made an announcement that shocked the aviation world. The company was halting all single-engine piston aircraft production. Immediately, indefinitely. The most prolific aircraft manufacturer on Earth would no longer build the planes that had made it famous. Piper Aircraft followed a grimmer path. Crushed under legal costs that consumed 40% of its entire revenue, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in July 1991. Beech Aircraft abandoned most of its piston product line, retreating to just 2 remaining models. The big 3 were dying. The production numbers tell a devastating story. In 1978, American manufacturers built 18,000 general aviation aircraft. By 1986, that number had collapsed to 4,000. By 1994, it had cratered to just 928 planes, a 95% decline, an entire industry in free fall. But here's what makes this collapse even more staggering. The human cost extended far beyond corporate boardrooms. Somewhere between 28,000 and 100,000 manufacturing jobs simply vanished. Wichita, Kansas, the self-proclaimed air capital of the world, watched its entire economic foundation crumble. Families lost livelihoods, communities lost purpose, dreams died. Yet even in this darkness, one man refused to surrender. Cessna chairman Russell Meyer launched an unprecedented personal crusade. His promise was bold and remarkably specific. Pass meaningful liability reform, and Cessna would restart production immediately. His exact words echoed across the industry. In a heartbeat. Meyer built an extraordinary coalition. He partnered with GARA President Ed Stimson. They recruited Senator Nancy Kassebaum and Representative Dan Glickman, both from Kansas. They brought in the Machinists' Union, whose members desperately needed those factory jobs back. They enlisted the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. For years, the trial lawyers blocked them at every turn. Committee chairmen refused hearings. Legislation died repeatedly. Then came an audacious gamble. Representative Glickman filed a discharge petition, an almost never-used procedural maneuver to bypass hostile committees entirely. Over 300 House members signed on. The momentum had finally shifted. On August 17, 1994, everything changed forever. President Clinton picked up his pen, and Russell Meyer prepared to keep his promise. The White House ceremony on August 17, 1994, marked a turning point in American aviation history. President Bill Clinton signed the General Aviation Revitalization Act into law, with Russell Meyer standing just feet away. After years of fighting, the industry had won. GARA established an 18-year statute of repose. The principle was elegantly simple. Manufacturers would no longer face liability for aircraft or components more than 18 years old at the time of an accident. That single provision immediately shielded approximately 75% of the certificated general aviation fleet from future litigation. A reporter from CBS approached Meyer outside the White House. She asked the obvious question: would Cessna actually resume production? His response was immediate and emphatic: just as soon as we can get everything organized. True to his word, Meyer moved with extraordinary speed. Within weeks, Cessna announced plans for an entirely new manufacturing facility. The location was Independence, Kansas, 120 miles from Wichita. Ground was broken in August 1994. Construction proceeded at an aggressive pace. In late 1996, something remarkable happened. The first new Cessna 172 rolled off the Independence assembly line. A decade of silence had ended. The most beloved training aircraft in aviation history was back in production. The revival exceeded even optimistic projections. Cessna built 1,500 aircraft in the first 12 months alone. Production lines that had sat dormant for 10 years hummed with renewed activity. Workers who had lost hope found employment again. The broader industry transformation was equally dramatic. Within 5 years of GARA's passage, 25,000 new aerospace manufacturing jobs had been created. That figure matched exactly what advocates had predicted during congressional testimony. An additional 3 support jobs emerged for every manufacturing position. Communities across Kansas and the broader aviation corridor experienced genuine economic revival. Piper Aircraft emerged from bankruptcy and resumed production of models it had abandoned. Beech stabilized its operations and maintained its surviving product lines. The bleeding had finally stopped. But here's what truly demonstrates GARA's lasting impact. The Cessna 172 that the company had declared too dangerous to manufacture now holds an extraordinary distinction. With over 45,000 units produced and counting, it has become the most manufactured aircraft in human history. The assembly lines that fell silent in 1986 had thundered back to life. General Aviation had not just survived, it had triumphed completely. But the real lesson extends far beyond airplanes. What happened to General Aviation wasn't a market failure or an engineering crisis. It was a policy catastrophe, a well-intentioned legal doctrine that metastasized until it nearly destroyed an entire American industry. The numbers tell an undeniable story. Before GARA, production had collapsed 95% and was still falling. After GARA, assembly lines roared back to life. Factories reopened. Jobs returned. The Cessna 172, the aircraft that Cessna had abandoned as too legally dangerous to build, resumed production and became the most manufactured aircraft in human history. Today, that little 4-seater with the high wings has trained more pilots than any aircraft ever built. Over 45,000 have rolled off production lines. Every single one built after 1996 exists because a coalition of manufacturers, workers, politicians, and pilots refused to let litigation kill an American industry. General Aviation survived because people fought back. They didn't accept decline as inevitable. They identified the problem, built coalitions across party lines, and changed the law. This is just one chapter in aviation's ongoing story. The industry faces new challenges today and new opportunities. If you want to see how those battles unfold, subscribe now. The next chapter is already being written.